Sorry, I think they were ironing stuff out on roll call.
Good morning. Welcome to the October 2013 meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda for this morning?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. Today's agenda includes 2 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking to address problems associated with completion of long-distance calls to rural areas. Second, you will consider a second report and order adopting technical rules for the 700 megahertz broadband spectrum licensed to the First Responder Network Authority. This is your agenda for today. The first item will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Julie Veach, Chief of the Bureau.
We'll work it out.
Will be here shortly, and the Bureau staff will take over for there.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Very creative. I appreciate that. Ms. Gelb, good morning, or Mr. Killian, or Mr. Lev, or Mr. Rowings? Rowings? Okay. See? Are you ready for this morning, or we are...
We are ready, but I believe the Bureau Chief is going to do the introduction, so I'll wait a couple minutes for her, if that's all right.
Okay. That's wonderful. So what should we talk about since we're on live? So
Halloween.
Halloween. Oh, we want to talk about Halloween, Lisa. What do we want to say about Halloween?
I'm for it.
Well, Commissioner, are you for Halloween?
I'm strongly for Halloween, yes.
Halloween.
I'm for the candy.
You're for the candy? For the candy. So we're going to notice a difference in sort of your voice today. Interesting.
Yeah,
Now she's going to be
lost
upset.
my voice a little bit.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, no.
If you'd like to get started, we could present the item.
We're really running out of things to say, so yeah.
On behalf of Julie Veach, who I'm sure will be here momentarily, good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. We are pleased to present for your consideration an item that takes significant steps to help ensure the completion of long-distance calls nationwide, including long-distance calls made to customers in rural America. It is unacceptable in 2013 for long-distance calls not to reach their destinations. Call connection problems cut off communications between family members, result in lost revenue for small businesses, and can cause dangerous delays in public safety communications. The actions we propose in this report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking will strengthen the Commission's and the state's ability to ensure that all consumers have access to a reasonable and non-discriminatory level of phone service. I would like to acknowledge and thank the team whose diligent efforts produced the items we present today. Seated with me are Steve Rowings, Attorney Advisor in the Bureau's Competition Policy Division, Bill Dever, Chief of the Competition Policy Division, Carol Simpson, Deputy Chief of the Division, as well as Chris Killian, Associate Chief of the Enforcement Bureau. I would also like to recognize the contributions of Jean Ann Collins, Greg Kwan, Rich Hovey, John Reel, Travis Littman, and Jamie Suskind. We greatly appreciate the input of our colleagues in the Enforcement Bureau and the Office of General Counsel, including Margaret Daly, Terry Cavanaugh, Marcus Mayer, Diane Griffin-Holland, Rick Mallon, and Suzanne Tatro. Steve Rowings will present the item.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. The draft report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking before you take several important steps toward ensuring that long-distance calls reach their intended destinations. It will improve the Commission's ability to monitor the completion rate of calls to rural areas and take enforcement actions where needed, and it also will reduce consumer confusion by prohibiting the use of false audible ringing. First, the order concludes that the long-distance provider deciding how to route a particular call, referred to as the covered provider, is in the best position to monitor call completion performance and therefore must collect the data needed to investigate and remedy any problems. Covered providers include local exchange carriers, inter-exchange carriers, CMRS providers, and interconnected and one-way VoIP providers. The order requires covered providers to retain, generally for a period of 6 months, data regarding call details for all attempted calls, both interstate and intrastate, to areas served by rural incumbent local exchange carriers as identified by operating company number, or OCN. In addition, the order requires covered providers to file quarterly reports with the Commission. These reports will contain aggregate data, including total call attempts to both rural and non-rural areas, calls answered, and calls that generate busy, ring no answer, or unassigned number signals that will allow the Commission to calculate call answer rates and network effectiveness ratios so that the Commission can compare rural and non-rural call completion performance and identify providers whose performance merits further scrutiny. To simplify this process, the order provides a template for these quarterly reports, and the Bureau will develop a simple online filing tool. The order takes a number of steps to reduce the burden on providers. First, application of the record-keeping, retention, and reporting requirements is limited to those covered providers with more than 100,000 subscriber lines. This reduces the burden on smaller entities while still capturing data for 95% of all long-distance subscriber lines. Second, the order limits retention of data to calls that are made to rural areas. Third, the order includes a safe harbor for covered providers that manage call completion performance by using no more than 2 intermediate providers in any call path. These providers will be relieved of the reporting requirement after 1 year and will reduce their data retention obligation from 6 months to 3. Finally, to encourage providers to take action to immediately improve rural call completion, the order delegates to the Wireline Competition Bureau, in consultation with the Enforcement Bureau, the authority to consider waivers to providers that adhere to industry best practices and other measures. In return, these providers will receive reduced data retention and reporting obligations. We note, however, that the Enforcement Bureau retains the authority to investigate any provider based on call completion complaints, regardless of whether that provider takes advantage of the safe harbor or receives a waiver. Finally, the order prohibits all originating and intermediate providers from sending audible ringing to the caller before the terminated provider has signaled that the called party is being alerted. The practice of injecting false audible ringing breaks from long-standing industry standards and upsets consumer expectations that, when the caller hears a ringtone, the phone is actually ringing at the other end. In addition, false audible ringing can mask excessive call setup time or inefficient routing practices that lead to failure. The further notice seeks comment on additional measures to ensure that long-distance voice service to rural areas is just, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. These include adopting rules to clarify the scope of the Commission's ban on call blocking, requesting more information on the nature and impact of autodialer traffic, and requiring certifications from intermediate providers. The further notice also seeks comment on requiring rural incumbent LECs to report call answer data that they may have as terminating carriers. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rawlings. We will now hear comments from the bench. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
For too long, consumers in rural America and the carriers that serve them have complained about dropped calls, missed calls, and connections that fail. This is unacceptable. After all, failure to complete calls to rural subscribers can cut families off from relatives in rural areas, lead rural businesses to lose customers, and create dangerous delays for first responder communications. This is a hard and unfortunately ubiquitous problem. One survey found that as many as 80% of rural carriers have experienced rural call completion failures. Our state counterparts also report that rural call completion difficulties are widespread. More than that, they are a serious threat to public safety and consumer welfare in rural America. So today, we answer the call to take action. We take steps to fix rural call completion. Specifically, in this order, we put in place new record-keeping, retention, and reporting requirements. This will help ensure that rural consumers receive service on par with that of their urban counterparts. Moreover, this data will support our enforcement efforts. That means that when calls fail or quality is unacceptably degraded in rural areas, the Commission will have the data necessary to go after bad actors, vigorously enforce its rules, and finally bring an end to this persistent problem. So thank you to the Wireline Competition Bureau and Enforcement Bureau for your hard work. The solutions we have here are built on common sense and transparency. That is why I strongly support this decision and the further rulemaking before us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Pye?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Most Americans take four things for granted: death, taxes, a Kansas City Chiefs victory on any given Sunday, and a telephone system that works. You dial a phone number, you hear a ring, and your call is completed. But for an increasing number of rural Americans, that's not the case. Calls are dropped. You get a busy signal, even when nobody is home. You dial a rural number and hear nothing for 5 or 6 seconds before the line disconnects. It almost seems like the most appropriate greeting when you call rural America nowadays should be, "Can you hear me now?" This is unacceptable. In fact, I can't put it any better than Deputy Chief Gelb put it. It is unacceptable in 2013 for calls not to reach their destination. Wherever you live, whether it's Pittsburgh, Kansas, or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and whatever technology you use, whether it's a landline, a cell phone, or VoIP, when your number is dialed, your phone should ring shortly thereafter. Consumers, state regulatory commissions, and rural telephone companies have expended a lot of effort bringing rural call completion problems to our attention. So I'm glad that the FCC is finally taking action to address this issue. With today's order, the Commission will start collecting data so we can better understand the difficulties involved. And armed with the information that we receive, we will be in a position to take action against those who are responsible. I'm especially pleased that my colleagues were willing to incorporate many of my suggestions. For instance, by aligning the safe harbor with established best practices and reducing the burden of compliance, we create stronger incentives for carriers to be good actors. By giving affiliated providers flexibility in recording and reporting their data, we reduce the administrative hassle our rules might otherwise cause. By targeting our record keeping on rural calls, we cut the cost of compliance by up to 90%. And by promising to re-examine our rules within 3 years, we ensure that the data isn't collected only to itself collect digital dust on a commission hard drive. Instead, the data will be used to ensure that our rules reflect current marketplace realities, a maxim that I think should apply to every area under the Commission's purview. And of course, today's action alone is unlikely to solve the call completion problems that have plagued rural America. I look forward to collaborating with my colleagues on future efforts, and many others are on the beat too. The staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Enforcement Bureau, and the Office of General Counsel deserve particular thanks for getting us this far. The Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Solutions, NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, and the National Exchange Carrier Association, and the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and many others are working hard to improve the quality of calls to rural America. Through our collective efforts and aided by the information we obtain, I hope that we will solve the rural call completion problem as soon as possible. Thanks to the staff for the great work on this item, and thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Commissioner. At the core of the FCC's mission is an obligation to ensure all Americans have access to reliable communication services. Yet in rural America, an alarming number of calls are not being completed. This is unacceptable, and today I am proud to say that the FCC is taking meaningful action to end this disparity. How big of a problem is this? Part of the challenge that today's order seeks to remedy is that we don't exactly know the answer. But according to one study, nearly a third of rural lines that were tested had completion problems on more than 20% of incoming calls. The same study found that the call failure rate was more than 13 times higher in rural areas than in non-rural areas. Clearly a problem exists, and it has real consequences. We've heard about calls from doctors to nursing homes not going through, that calls to businesses aren't getting completed, and that rural consumers are frustrated when their friends and families are not able to reach them. Even more critically, calls to public safety authorities which are not completed can literally mean the difference between life and death. Consumers expect and deserve to be able to make and receive phone calls. When any American, rural or urban, is cut off from communications, the FCC must take decisive and meaningful action. I've long been a champion for fast and effective remedies to rule call completion, and the problems are addressed in today's order. This has been a personal priority for me. It represents a welcome step forward in making sure that this serious issue is properly addressed. I am pleased by our efforts to tackle this problem through the formation of a rule call completion task force, with the issuance of clarifying orders and the pursuit of enforcement cases. And today, we take our biggest step yet toward fixing the problem. This order will enhance our ability to investigate and crack down on call completion problems by requiring providers to retain information about calls on their networks and report it to the FCC. The data can isolate call completion problems, drive improvements by providers, and arm the FCC with powerful tools for enforcement. The order will also give our state partners invaluable data on intrastate calls to assist them in their efforts to address call completion issues. Moreover, the order gives carriers incentives to immediately improve rural service quality by offering a safe harbor that erases data collection and reporting requirements for providers that adopt practices that are known to improve call completion rates. And the order includes a waiver process for providers that meet the safe harbor, which will make sure that we receive key data, but will further reduce the burden for providers that demonstrate superior call completion practices. I am also pleased that the order takes immediate and common sense steps to help remedy the scope of the problem, reduce consumer confusion, and improve the quality of long-distance calls for rural Americans. One significant improvement focuses on ringtones. When a caller hears a ringtone in the handset after dialing, he or she assumes the call has gone through. But that's not always the case. The caller may hear ringing when in fact the call never rings on the other end of the line. This practice masks the problem of failed calls and mistakenly leads consumers into believing that the call was completed but that no one picked up. This order prohibits this premature ringing. Silence on the line will make it clear to consumers when there is a call completion issue, and this will help carriers more quickly identify those problems. While today's order will be a significant step forward, we must remain vigilant, which is why we seek comment on further action in the furthest notice of proposed rulemaking. The further notice will make sure that we continue to have the tools necessary to take additional steps to investigate and eliminate call completion concerns. I'd like to thank Commissioners Rosenworcel and Pye for their consideration on this item, the Wireline Competition and Enforcement Bureaus, as well as Rebecca Goodhart for their work on this item and for their dedication and tireless efforts to address this critical problem in rural America. So unless there's any more discussion, we will proceed to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. So ordered. The request for editorial privileges is granted. Madam Secretary, please announce our next item. Thank you very much.
Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, the final item on your agenda today will be presented by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. It is entitled Implementing Public Safety Broadband Provisions of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, implementing a nationwide broadband interoperable public safety network in the 700 megahertz band.
Thank you very much. We're having great production synergies this morning. Good morning, Mr. Turetsky.
Good morning. Applying the wisdom of Woody Allen, showing up is 90% of life, so we're happy to be here. My name is David Turetsky, and I'm Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Today, I'm here with two colleagues from our Bureau, Engineer Rasul Safavian and Attorney Brian Hurley. Today, we are presenting a report and order that adopts technical service rules for the 700 megahertz broadband spectrum licensed to the First Responder Network Authority, known as FirstNet. In 2012, Congress created FirstNet and charged it with establishing a nationwide public safety broadband network for first responders under a commission license. This license comprises two adjacent spectrum bands, a 10 megahertz band already established for public safety broadband services, and the 10 megahertz D block that had been slated for commercial auction. Because these two bands were allocated differently, they were subject to previously adopted service rules contained in separate rule parts. The report and order we present today consolidates the requirements that govern these bands into a single set of Part 90 rules. Perhaps the most important consequence of doing so is that it will enable equipment certification to commence in this band, as FirstNet and many commenters urge. In particular, the Commission's adoption of this item will allow certified equipment and devices to be made available to serve the early deployments FirstNet has planned for its network in the near term and facilitate equipment availability for FirstNet more generally as it continues to plan its network deployment. As such, the Commission is taking an important step for the benefit of FirstNet and all of those whom it will serve by enabling equipment and device competition and innovation to proceed apace for both existing competitors and potential new entrants. Accordingly, adoption of this report and order will further, quote, facilitate the transition, close quote, of spectrum to FirstNet and help advance its vital public safety mission. This report and order is the result of sustained collaboration among staff in numerous bureaus and offices. In particular, I would like to thank our bureaus, Erica Olson, Jean Filano, Rasul Safavian, Behzad Ghaffari, Yun Chang, and Brian Hurley. In the Wireless Bureau, Charles Mathias and Tom Peters, among others. In the Office of Engineering and Technology, Renee Wetzel-Gregory, Rashmi Doshi and Walter Johnston, again among others, and our colleagues in the Office of General Counsel, including David Horowitz and Bill Richardson. And with that, I turn to Brian Hurley, who will present the item.
Good morning. Today we present for the Commission's consideration a report and order that adopts technical service rules for the 700 megahertz spectrum licensed to FirstNet. Chiefly, this rulemaking involves consolidating under Part 90 a number of existing technical rules now codified in parallel Part 27 and Part 90 provisions. The report and order also makes further administrative revisions consistent with this approach. The vast majority of commenters in this proceeding, including FirstNet, support this consolidation of necessary technical rules, which will preserve FirstNet's flexibility in deploying its network while protecting operations in adjacent bands from harmful interference. First, the report and order consolidates into Part 90 existing power and antenna height limits, including power flux density limits, as well as limits on emissions into commercial bands and the adjacent narrowband public safety spectrum. To further protect operations in this band from interference, the report and order retains the 2 megahertz paired guard band that separates the narrowband and broadband segments of the 700 megahertz public safety spectrum. This 2 megahertz allocation is licensed to FirstNet, who supports its continued use as a guard band. In light of FirstNet's statutory obligations to consult with state and local governments as it deploys its network, the report and order declines to impose formal coordination requirements on FirstNet or establish field strength limits for its licensed spectrum. The report and order clarifies, however, that the Commission will continue to exercise its spectrum management responsibilities as necessary to protect all authorized operations from harmful interference. The technical requirements consolidated in this report and order include those that will form the basis for equipment certification to begin in this band. Accordingly, the report and order lifts the current suspension on the acceptance and processing of such certifications and directs the Office of Engineering and Technology to commence its certification process for this band under the newly consolidated rules. Moreover, in recognition of the urgent need for certified equipment to serve the early deployments that are planned in FirstNet's spectrum, the report and order finds good cause for making its rules effective upon publication in the Federal Register. Finally, the report and order clarifies that any pending matters not resolved therein are deferred for future consideration. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley and Mr. Tereski. Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Thank you. Our efforts today are a small piece of something historic. History was made in last year's Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act. It was in this law that Congress came together and determined to right a long-standing wrong. More than a decade after the horror of 9/11 and many years after the watery devastation of Hurricane Katrina, Congress sought to help public safety officials across the country by doing something very simple: putting them all on the same airwaves. This facilitates interoperability, enhances functionality, and creates scale that over time could reduce the cost of first responder communications. But more than that, it means that those who wear the shield will be able to communicate better in crisis and make us more safe. Congress sought to make all of this happen through the First Responders Network Authority, or FirstNet. Specifically, Congress charged FirstNet with the responsibility to deploy and operate a nationwide, interoperable, public safety wireless broadband network using spectrum in the 700 megahertz band. When FirstNet's board was first put in place 14 months ago, they faced a steep climb. They had to stand up an organization from scratch. They had to build their efforts on essential input from public safety officials from across the country. They had to consider how this network would be deployed in a way that was smart, cost-effective, and consistent with congressional goals. This is a bold undertaking. Getting it done will require grit, gumption, and moving beyond the conventional wisdom. But historic efforts usually do. And because progress sometimes occurs only in obscurity, I think it is worth itemizing the good work done to date. First, the organization. FirstNet is now staffed by full-time employees. This includes a well-respected permanent management team with extensive experience in wireless networks, public safety communications, governmental outreach, and financial management. Plus, more help is on its way. The board recently approved a $194 million budget that will be used for, among other things, additional hiring to support its work. Second, the outreach. To make sure the voice of public safety is always heard, the FirstNet board established a Public Safety Advisory Committee. This committee is made up of 41 individuals from every segment of the public safety community, from state, local, and tribal entities to technology experts and security officials. As part of its outreach efforts, the board has also acknowledged that the most important input is not from Washington. It is from those on the front lines. So from its very first day, FirstNet reached out to state and local public safety officials. It has held 6 regional workshops and consulted directly with every state and territory for a total of 55 meetings to date. Third, the network. FirstNet has been laying the foundation for the network it will develop through a series of public-private partnerships. Last year, the Commission helped move this effort along by establishing a board that developed minimum technical standards to ensure nationwide interoperability for the network. But FirstNet has gone further. It has issued 11 requests for information, seeking industry input on wireless devices, network partnering and provisioning, antenna systems, satellite service, enhanced packet core specifications, data centers, network operation centers, and more. More importantly, industry has responded with 340 jam-packed filings, dense with information FirstNet will consider as it proceeds. Finally, some locations are moving beyond the planning stages and are already moving ahead. To this end, the board has approved spectrum leases with a major city, Los Angeles, and an entire state, New Mexico. So what's next? That is where our decision today comes in. It is small, but important. We respond to a call from FirstNet for consolidated service rules for their 700 megahertz spectrum. Consolidated service rules make it possible to develop and certify new equipment for the public safety network. They establish the technical underpinnings for public safety communications to flourish in this band without disturbing their spectral neighbors. But it is just as important to note what these rules do not do. Our rules are streamlined. They do not layer on unnecessary requirements or duplicate build-out obligations already in the law. That is not what Congress asked us to do, and that is not what we do here. Instead, we make decisions to help FirstNet get off the ground and down to the business of improving public safety. So thank you to the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for your good work on this important item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pye.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This morning's order takes the technical rules found in Part 27 and Part 90 for the 700 megahertz public safety broadband spectrum and consolidates them into a harmonized set of Part 90 rules. By giving the private sector technical certainty and paving the way for the prompt certification of devices, today's item should help the equipment market for the 700 megahertz public safety band to develop and for innovation to flourish. The end result, all of us hope, will be a bevy of nationally portable, interoperable public safety broadband devices. Today's action, suffice it to say, is important, but our duty to the nation's first responders does not end with it. The First Responder Network Authority, or FirstNet, is still getting off the ground, and we must maintain continued oversight over the spectrum license that we have granted it. There are also complicated issues regarding incumbent narrowband users in this spectrum, which have to be addressed. And critically, we need to stay on course with our spectrum auctions so that FirstNet is adequately funded. That means holding a successful H-Block auction in January. That means designing the rules of the broadcast incentive auction with an eye toward maximizing the net revenues produced by that auction. And that means finding creative solutions and working collaboratively with federal users and the private sector to clear and auction prime spectrum like the 1755 to 1780 megahertz band. I want to thank the staff of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their continued hard work on this and many other proceedings necessary to meet the obligations that Congress set forth in the Spectrum Act. Thanks to all of your efforts, I am confident that the Commission's efforts to promote public safety will be successful today and in the years to come. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Hurricane Sandy made landfall in the United States 1 year ago tomorrow with a force so traumatic that an area stretching over 1,000 miles from Florida to Maine was impacted. Sandy reminded us of the importance of communications during disasters, that it is vital for all Americans, particularly our brave public safety responders who risk their lives every day to keep our communities safe. After that storm, the Commission conducted a series of field hearings to see what lessons we could learn from this historic, catastrophic event. On the anniversary of Sandy, it is fitting that the Commission is moving forward with yet another item that will help improve public safety communications. When Congress enacted the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, it provided a solid framework for a nationwide interoperable public safety broadband network, a network that the public safety community needs and deserves to protect our communities. In concert with the First Responder Network Authority and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the Commission is working to ensure the success of this first-of-its-kind network. Today, the Commission meets its congressional directive by adopting important technical rules for the 700 megahertz public safety broadband spectrum. These clear rules will advance FirstNet's mission by spurring innovation and competition in the market for public safety broadband equipment. The rules provide urgently needed clarity for equipment manufacturers and will facilitate prompt product development to support the early adopters in the band and to meet FirstNet's deployment timelines. The rules will also fulfill the Commission's obligation to provide interference protection to other Commission licensees, ensuring that users in adjacent spectrum can continue to operate without harmful interference. Today's action addresses the most pressing concern in this proceeding: technical rules for the public safety band, which provide vendors with the lead time necessary to bring equipment to the marketplace. However, we also remain aware of the other outstanding issues in this docket and understand the importance of their timely resolution. We will continue to work with all stakeholders to ensure that these issues are addressed. I would like to thank the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau and the Office of Engineering and Technology for their work on this issue, along with the International Bureau, Wireless Bureau, and the Office of General Counsel. In particular, I would like to thank Bureau Chief David Tereski and staff members Brian Hurley, Jean Folano, Razul Zafarian, Razul, thank you for being patient with me, Erica Olsen, Behzad Zafari, and Chang, and the Public Safety Bureau for their efforts, and please forgive me, you know how grateful I am, for their efforts in bringing this item to the commission today. So unless there's any more discussion and I can mess up someone else's name, we will proceed to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The request for editorial privileges is granted. Thank you very much. And forgive me, Rasul, and others. Before we adjourn, I'd like to make a few brief announcements. Before closing today's open meeting, as I said, I have two announcements. The first is the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. This is that. And we're making available to our employees sessions on personal security online, particularly mobile security, in the FCC's Tech Experience Center, which is on this floor through Wednesday of this week. I invite any of you here for today's meeting to attend today's session if your time permits. I'd like to thank the companies and organizations who are participating in this effort. Thank you again so very much. Second, late last Friday, my colleagues and I adopted the order making rule changes and license modifications that are necessary to implement a voluntary industry solution to establish interoperability between wireless licensees in the lower 700 megahertz band. As most people know, this was an important priority for me. I wish to thank my colleagues for their support and the parties who worked in a collaborative spirit to make this happen: AT&T, the Interoperability Alliance, the Competitive Carriers Association, DISH, and consumer advocacy groups. I also greatly appreciate the tremendous sacrifice and work from Jim Slickling and other members of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, including Bureau Chief Ruth Milkman, my Chief of Staff Michelle Ellison, and my wireless advisor Louis Peretz. And last but certainly not least, on this afternoon, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate my colleague, Commissioner Pai, and his wife, Janine, on the birth of their daughter, Annabelle. I am told that mother and baby are doing just great, and that Alexander Pai is loving his new role as big brother. I hope that Commissioner Pai will bring this beautiful little lady by my office soon. But until then, I offer the entire Pai family my best wishes. Congratulations.
Thanks. Thanks.
At this time, are there any announcements? Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Well, I too want to congratulate Commissioner Pai on the birth of Annabelle. We also have other news in my office on the baby front. My terrific wireline advisor, Priscilla Delgado Argyris, just gave birth last week to a baby boy, Peter Stephen Argyris, and mom and child are at home doing well. And for the astute among you, you'll notice that his initials are PSA. So our commitment to communications policy in my office runs deep. While Priscilla is out for good reason, we have Christy Barnhart joining my office from the Wireline Competition Bureau. So I am grateful to the Bureau for allowing us to have her. And she's already stepped in on today's rural call completion item and is fast at stepping up to all the other tasks in my office. So thank you and welcome, Christy.
And congratulations to your office, too. Commissioner Pai?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. First, thanks very much for the kind words about our little girl, or our Peach, as what we call her. The picture sort of is misleading, though, because it makes it look as if I was asleep, and I can guarantee you that I've not slept since about October 11th. In addition to Annabelle, who we hope will join OET soon, her initials are AMP, as you might see. I'd like to introduce Jeff Newman, who has been detailed to our office from the Media Bureau. Jeff grew up in Troy, Michigan, and he earned his undergraduate degree in engineering from Michigan. He started working at the FCC right out of college in 2003, and while at the FCC, he earned his law degree from Georgetown. Jeff lives in Alexandria with his wife and his 2 twin sons, Christopher and Joseph. I've seen them, and I can verify that they were equally cute. I am frankly disappointed that I'm no longer the tallest person in our office, but nonetheless, we are delighted that Jeff has agreed to join our team, and we would like to thank the Media Bureau for sending him our way. And that's all I have on my end.
Thank you so very much. Though she was not here earlier, I wish to thank Bureau Chief Julie Veach and her staff once again on the rule call completion item. Thank you very much. I know you're working through a lot of things, and I appreciate all of your hard work. With that, Madam Secretary, would you please announce the date of the next Commission open meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, November 14th, 2013.
Thank you. Until then, we stand adjourned.
We know you well, Paul. Could you just say your name and identify your outlet?
Wheeler's nomination is held up, confirmation by Senator Cruz for a substantial period of time. Would you go ahead and move by the end of the year, if he's not in yet, an incentive auction order without waiting for Mr. Wheeler?
I want to affirm, well, again, good afternoon now. I want to affirm to you that that process is an ongoing one. We have had 150 ex parte meetings. We've had a number of 2 PNs. We've had a number of ongoing things that have pushed this item forward. So this is the first of its kind incentive auction process that, again, that is moving, that is continual, and there are no delays, and we are poised and stand ready to have an auction next year. So there's absolutely no delay.
Hi, Matthew Schwartz with Communications Daily. I'm just wondering if you have had a chance to meet yet with Tom Wheeler to discuss the transition to his chairmanship.
I have not met, well, I met Tom Wheeler face-to-face one time since he was nominated. We have been in touch by email. We have a nice friendship relationship that is very friendly. I'll just put it that way. So I'm looking forward to meeting with him. Again, we've already established, I think, a solid friendship. And, when he gets confirmed, I know we will get along just grand. And this agency, again, will continue to be well managed.
Bryce Bashik with Bloomberg BNA. Good afternoon, Ms. Chairwoman.
Good afternoon.
I wanted to touch on an item from last month's commission hearing. Has the commission set the exemption date for the elimination of the UHF discount? And if not, when can we expect that?
As you know, that item is still live, still open. We will review all of the submissions in that record, and at that time I'll be more poised to answer that question.
Well, I'm for Halloween too, and if I don't win the Politico party this year, we'll know it's fixed. So, if there looks like there's another hold that's looming on Mr. Wheeler, so it very well could be that we could have another couple of months with you as the chairwoman, which could be a good thing. So, what would you be able to move from the incentive auction?
I'm not sure how to interpret that.
What could you move from the incentive auction if it drags on for another couple of months?
Again, this is a course that is predestined. It is set out. So we have a number of timetables, a number of benchmarks that we are continuing to realize. As you know, we have teed up, a workshop that will take place shortly. We've done a number of have had a number of updates, two to be exact, during the commission meetings. And so again, there is no delay, there is no slowdown as it relates to this process. It is one that has been well vetted out. We've got a team of professionals who know what their task is, and their task is to bring to this nation increased efficiencies for the broadcasters and to answer the call for our critical need and desire for more spectrum. And so we will continue to do that. There is and will be no slowdown.
Hi, I'm Gautam Nagesh with the Wall Street Journal. Two questions. One was about the Dish complaint regarding Media General. We've seen these retransmission disputes increase in frequency recently, and you've expressed some views on that topic. Do you have any comment on this specific complaint and on the broader issue of resolving this, or the Commission having some authority to do so?
Well, I remain constant in my advocacy for consumers. They have expectations in this space. When they turn the channel, they have expectations that they will have a robust viewing dynamic, and so I will do everything that I can, that we are authorized to do, to ensure that happens. And you had another question, which we don't usually do, but since you're new to me, we'll let that go.
I appreciate that. It's about the media ownership rules, specifically the newspaper broadcast cross-ownership rule. What are the odds that we will see that on the agenda in the coming weeks if you continue to serve as acting chairwoman?
As you know, we've had a number of review. We have had a number of submissions as it relates to that docket that we are continuing to review, and at the appropriate time, we will deliver a report as mandated by Congress.
Good morning, Todd Shields, Bloomberg News. An issue in Mr. Wheeler's hold before the Senate is whether the FCC would impose by administrative means further campaign finance disclosure mandates along the lines of the Disclose Act. Should the FCC require more political speech disclosure?
That was not an item on the agenda. Thank you.
Hi, Alina Salik with Reuters. To follow up on the interoperability announcement today, I'm wondering what is happening with the other request by Dish. It's sort of part of the big, package of things Dish is trying to negotiate with you guys. The AWS-4 proceeding, can you give us an update on what the timing of that might be?
I will yield that to the wireless bureau to give you a more precise update on that, if you don't mind. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So we have the Bureau here if you want to do some questions on rural call completion. And actually, Alina, should we start?
Yeah, sure.
We'll start this side this time.
Hi, I'm Alina with Reuters. You heard my question, trying to figure out what the status is of the AW4. AWS4.
Wrong bureau. That's the wireless bureau. This is the wireline bureau.
Oh, hi. Hi. Never mind then. I just heard the prompt Alina go, so I just went.
Does anyone have?
Yeah, I do. Anybody else? Yeah, you got one? You want to go? All right. So there's been some complaints. Brandon in particular says that this problem really doesn't even exist. I mean, so what did y'all do exactly? I still don't get it.
Okay, so two things. The record in this case, as well as the work of our Rural Call Completion Task Force and my colleagues in the Enforcement Bureau, shows persuasively and unfortunately that there is a problem terminating calls, in particular to rural incumbent LECs. There may be multiple causes of this, and the FCC is not here imposing performance standards, but rather what we are doing is requiring providers to collect and retain data on how successfully their own customers' calls are reaching their destinations, in particular when that destination is a rural incumbent LEC. We're also requiring providers to report that information to us in an aggregate summary fashion so that we too can see first whether there are performance problems with individual carriers, and second, so that we can have a better understanding of the causes or more specific details of this problem so that we can take enforcement action where we need to make sure that this gets addressed.
Yeah, I guess basically I'm just looking for a few more specifics, since we haven't gotten the fact sheet yet, about what changes were made from the from the initial time the order was circulated until now. I know that Verizon had been very concerned about the prospect of keeping 20 billion individual call records, if they had to keep records of all calls going to both urban and rural destinations. So how exactly has that been kind of streamlined, that reporting requirement? And when Ajit Pai spoke of some of his suggestions that were approved, can you go into a little more detail about that?
So the version of the item that was adopted just now made some changes from what was proposed in the NPRM and also some changes through the normal deliberative process. One, you alluded to some of the arguments about the burden of having to retain a lot of data about billions of call attempts. One thing that the order does is it limits the data retention obligation to calls that are destined to rural incumbent LECs, which is, I don't remember the percentage of calls specifically that is out of all calls attempted, but it's a fairly small percent. So for calls that are destined to non-rural areas, nobody has to retain that data. It's just the calls to rural areas. So that should reduce the burden significantly. Another way that we've reduced the burden, although I don't think it's a change, is by limiting the obligations in general to providers that have more than 100,000 subscriber lines. So very small originating carriers are not subject to that rule, and we think that we're still going to get about 95% of all the calls in there. Some other features of the order, there's a safe harbor, which you heard a little bit about earlier. If a provider that's covered by our rules can certify to us that it either does not use intermediate providers, meaning that call stays on its own network until it reaches the terminating carrier, or that it limits the number of intermediate providers for any particular call path to no more than 2, then it qualifies for the safe harbor and has reduced reporting and data retention obligations. In addition, providers can come into us and apply for a waiver to get even further reduced obligations. And some of the things that the Bureau will look at in considering a waiver like that are whether the provider complies with industry best practices, such as the ones developed by ADIS. So there are a couple different levels of relief that providers can get, and each level of relief we think will result in better performance in terminating calls to rural areas.
Just a brief follow-up. Can you go into a little more detail about the best industry practices as developed by ADIS?
So some of the things that are required or not required, but that ADIS recommends that industry best practices are things that involve, for example, how you, whether you can send a call back to another provider if it's not going through, or, can you address a looping problem to prevent calls from just sort of looping around among providers and not actually getting to their destinations and not alerting the calling party that there's a problem. It gets a little bit weedy, so I'll let that go where it is, but it's in the record. The ADIS handbook is in the record along with some ex partes describing industry best practices that the Bureau will consider if we get any request for waiver of the data requirements.
And could that reduce, what would such a waiver grant them in terms of further relief?
That'll be decided case by case as the Bureau, and when I say the Bureau, it's the Wireline Bureau, but in consultation with the Enforcement Bureau, which has a lot of expertise here. We would look at a provider showing on a case-by-case basis, but we're going to be looking at what kinds of best practices have they adopted, what kinds of self-monitoring processes do they have to make sure that calls are actually getting through to rural areas, and the relief. The relief could be further relief from data retention requirements, but we know that there will be some amount of reporting, at least temporarily, so that we can be assured that calls are actually getting through.
Thank you.
Paul, did you have a question?
I've got one more. Everybody seems to say that the problem has to do with the least cost routers. Do you guys get it, the least cost routers?
The order specifically requires that the all the data retention and the reporting is done by not the least cost routers, but the originating providers or the covered carriers. More specifically, it's by the first provider in any call chain that decides how to route a call based on its destination. The reason for that is that it's within the power of the originating providers to determine the call path, and it's ultimately their responsibility to make sure that the calls are getting through. So the reporting obligations go directly to those providers. We do seek comment on whether we should take any further actions with regard to intermediate providers, but these data-related obligations go to the originating carriers who have the control and the ability to fix this through their own practices and through their contracts with intermediate providers.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Do you have some questions on interoperability for the Wireless Bureau? AWS? Yeah. Okay.
That's public safety.
Do you have any questions on the 911, the reliability item? We'll jump to the wireless.
Elena?
Elena.
Hi.
Should I try yet again, or do I need to come up with
for you? So your question was about the AWS 4 waiver that DISH had requested,
right.
And that is in a separate pleading cycle.
I understand.
A pleading cycle that closes today, and we have staff actively working on that.
What's the time frame for what happens next after that?
Well, DISH requested that it be done 30 days before the H-Block auction, and
Okay.
the H-Block auction is scheduled now for January 22nd.
So we're looking before the end of the year. Ish. Thank you.
So what was included in today's or Friday's, whenever it was approved, in that particular order?
So today's order has to do with 700 megahertz interoperability, and it has to do with AT&T's commitments, which they filed in early September, and it makes those commitments conditions on AT&T's B and C block licenses. It changes the technical rules for the D and E blocks, which are adjacent to the A, B, and C. And it does that by lowering the power limits. That's the spectrum that AT&T holds some of and had already previously agreed to these power limits in the context of the AT&T Qualcomm transaction, and that DISH holds the remainder of. And DISH was saying it would agree to the power limit reductions if it's the AWS-4 waiver that Alina mentioned was granted. And then it makes a finding that the Channel 51 interference is not a problem for the B and C blocks, not likely to be a problem. And it extends construction deadlines for the A and B block licensees to December 2016? December 2016. So it's 3 years from the current deadline. That's the interim deadline. And it also extends the interim and final deadlines for the E block.
Along those lines, there's in the interoperability deal that was announced that this is part of, it was like last month or whenever it was announced, DISH had made a commitment to bid, I can't remember, a big number on the H block. How is that enforceable with what we did today? What if they just decide, hell no, we're not going to bid?
Well, DISH's commitment to bid was used as an input into the Commission's decision to set a reserve price in the H block auction. So the H block auction, like many other auctions, has a reserve price. It's common for the net proceeds of the auction to exceed the reserve price, so it may not ever be the effective limit. But the reserve price is memorialized in the H block procedures PN, which went out earlier this month, I guess.
Brian, sorry, Brian.
Ms. Milkman, there have been a few reports in the news recently that you're being considered for Tom Wheeler's chief of staff. Wondering if you would comment on if you've met with him about that, or if you would be interested in that position.
No comment.
Okay.
Ruth, on the E block, the extension of the E block, interim and final, the deadlines would be what DISH had asked for, correct?
Yes.
And then on the the A and B, it'd be December 13, 2016, the interim?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
So the E are March 7th, 2017 and March 7th, 2021, which I think is, if we've done everything right, it should be what DISH asked for.
Okay.
So this one more question, sorry. All right, we moved the auction back because of the shutdown.
Yeah.
And now it looks like it's going to be in the middle of what could be another shutdown. I mean, is that a fear among y'all that we might have this auction, or that can you protect the auction activity?
Yes, we can protect the auction activity, and in fact, that is what the Commission did in 1995, 1996 shutdowns. One of the PCS auctions was going, I think the C block was going at the time, and it kept going. Those auction staff needed to keep the auction running, and the contractors remained working.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,